I'm just gonna pull up my notes here, you know what I mean? Because I took some notes. Hey guys, it's Cam from Craft & Tailored, and in this episode of What is on My Wrist, we are talking about a 1986 Rolex Explorer II reference 16550. This model is in exceptional condition. It is a rail dial, and it's also what we would call like a cream dial. Really, really cool example of the reference. It's a transitional reference for the Rolex Explorer II, so that's why it's on my wrist, and that's why we're ultimately talking about it in this episode. So let's talk a little bit about the Explorer II. I want to talk about why the 16550 is a transitional reference for the Explorer II, and then kind of dive into the details of this specific example, because the Polar, as they have nicknamed the white dial Explorer IIs, are increasing in their popularity, but this is an early example, so I figured this would be kind of a good example to talk about the reference range in itself, but also this one has some really key details as an example by itself that make it worthy of discussion and featuring on our channel. So Rolex started producing the 16550 in 1985, and they only ran the reference until 1989, making it a rather short model amongst its peer. The black gloss dial with white gold hands and hour markers were similar to, like, let's say the Submariner and the GMTs that were produced in that era and time. And what's really kind of cool and interesting about the early 16550s is that the dial, being a white dial, is kind of unique for a sports watch, but the early examples such as this, the white gold kind of new markers that you saw like in the GMTs and the subs and all that kind of stuff were actually still white. They weren't black enameled until much later. So kind of really cool to see an earlier example like this that doesn't have the black markers and hands. That's one feature that I really like about the Explorer II reference range as a whole. I think that it's kind of interesting and unique that Rolex, to increase the visibility of the markers and the hands on the white dial, enameled the hands and then ultimately the markers black so that you have that kind of high contrast and that kind of pop off of the dial. Whereas with this, I think obviously from a technical form meets function perspective, the markers would have had a tendency to blend into that white dial as would the hands. So I think that Rolex, being an innovative company, obviously kind of moved, away from having that kind of, white dial with those non-enameled black hands and, markers to yield a higher visibility. So kind of interesting there. This specific example, let me just not itch my face when I'm this specific example is rare for a couple of different reasons. One, the dial is obviously white, it's a polar dial, but these early dials have had a tendency to kind of go yellow or creamy. So this is a cream dial 16550, which makes it very desirable, but it's also really eye-catching while on wrist. And funny enough, the dial, as it's kind of aged and taken on this patina, it yields a higher level of contrast between the dial, the markers, and the hands, which are done in white gold, which obviously don't oxidize or anything like that. So now you can kind of see the hands, obviously, as they pop off the dial, as it provides a level of contrast, which is really cool. This specific example is also a rail dial, and what that means is that the text for superlative chronometer officially certified is basically stacked so that there is like a rail in between superlative chronometer and officially certified. But really organized text on this dial, and obviously not all 16550s have a rail dial. And that's something that we've seen in the past with Rolex too. For example, like a Sea Dweller 1665, that dial also had a rail dial variant among some other dials. So kind of an interesting organization of the superlative officially certified chronometer text. Wow, that's super nerdy. Superlative official. Sorry.
Go for it, man.
The difference between obviously the 16650 and the 16570 is the movement. So Rolex updated the caliber of the movement and they ultimately migrated to the 3185. What's interesting too about both of the movements is that it has an independently settable, I don't know if that's a horological term, but basically the hour hand jumps and you can quickly advance the hour hand independent of the minute and the GMT hand. So kind of a nice feature, making this non-rotatable bezel actually functional for telling time in two different places and having two different time zones, whereas like with the Explorer II reference 1655, unless you were underground or in a submarine or whatever, you could just see outside and tell if it was night or day, right? So let's talk a little bit about the specifics of this example from 1986. The first thing that, of course, we're going to notice is that the dial in itself has this very warm and amazing cream coloration. That's obviously very sought after by the collector community. It's not white. It is very much like this amazing kind of almost like custardy kind of yellowy cream color. That's just through age and time and etc. The case on this model is awesome too, very much an unpolished example, full crown guards, present and visible chamfers, even like the faceting on the bezel is still intact. The bracelet's in really nice condition. So everything from the original 501 end links to the 78 360 bracelet. Even the date code on the bracelet is actually correct for this. And another cool thing too is that with the later models of the Explorer II, you kind of had like this oyster semi flip lock. That's not the case with the 16550s. Didn't have, at least in the early examples, they didn't have that kind of like oyster flip lock clasp. They just kind of had like this simple press fit clasp, which is cool. Watch wears, at 40 millimeters, oyster case, wears similar to like a GMT, sapphire crystal obviously, but really nice overall example, wears really nicely on the wrist. It's definitely a cool watch. And to find one like this that remains in unpolished condition with this really nice kind of creamy dial, I think is really cool. So in any case, guys, I'll provide a link in the description below so that you can check out the range of Rolex Explorer IIs that we have on the Craft and Tailored site. If you've got questions, we're here and happy to help. Feel free to drop us a line at info@craftandtailored.com. And as always, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. That helps us out and allows us to keep producing this stuff for you guys. So thanks for tuning in, and we will see you in the next one. Sorry, Pete.
It's all good.
We'll get it. Hold on.
Oh, you're saying sorry to future me.
Yeah, sorry to future you.